Hello, I'm Tomáš Valášek and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. The war in Ukraine is continuing with a bleak outlook when it comes to the country's future, at least when it comes to the possible change of guard at the White House. In the light of all this, NATO obviously is preparing for the impending change. But also there is another very interesting discussion going on between NATO countries, namely, what should we do about Russian drones and missiles if they stray a bit too close to our airspace? And in this discussion, Poland has actually taken a powerful stance, which it seems might actually be shared by more and more lawmakers in Washington. We're going to talk about this and more with our guest today, Tomáš Valášek, former Slovakian ambassador to NATO. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello and welcome, and thank you for the invitation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. And let us begin with the question of Russian missiles and drones, because this has been really the sort of bone of contention between several countries and the NATO headquarters. Apparently, the Helsinki Commission is now recommending to the US President that the elimination of such threats is a task that should be given over to NATO members. They should be free to shoot down Russian drones and missiles if they threaten to penetrate the airspace instead of hitting targets in Ukraine. So do you think that this may actually be a change of heart in Washington, that we might still see this happening, perhaps before the elections or shortly thereafter?
I hope that is the case, because as far as international law is concerned, it's pretty clear on the subject. The Russian missiles and drones have no business flying in a Ukrainian aerospace, much less threatening possibly to cross into the aerospace of NATO member states. If Ukraine, as a sovereign country, requests our help in shooting them down, and on top of that, if they threaten possibly to cross into our airspace, then again, international law says clearly we have every right to do so. The reason we don't is for fear of escalation. That Russia might somehow consider itself at war with NATO. My response to that is they already do, right? I mean, if you listen to the Russian propagandists, if you listen to President Putin, he already speaks of this as being essentially a war that he's waging against the entire alliance. I don't see what we have to lose in terms of the feared escalation. Shooting down those missiles seems like the right thing to do, not only for Ukraine, but for our own security. You don't want to wait until they come too close, and especially if they come actually over our territory. It makes sense to shoot them down over Ukraine for preemptive reasons. And as I said, I think the legal and the security case for that is overwhelmingly strong.
Of course, we should clarify, this is not closing the sky above Ukraine. This has been actually suggested by the Ukrainians in the early moments of the war. They thought that NATO perhaps could provide this sort of security umbrella by creating a no-fly zone. Well, the decision makers within NATO said, well, this would be going too far, because this could actually put our troops, namely our fighter pilots, in a position where they would need to engage with the Russians in the skies, not just unmanned vehicles. However, missiles flying close to the borders, this is a different thing. And do you think that really Russia could use that as an argument for escalation, where there has been an incident where Turkey shot down a Russian fighter jet and there was no war between NATO and Russia?
Well, I don't advise we go down the way of Turkey. That was too close to comfort. Nobody is suggesting that we actually shoot down manned Russian aircraft. So just to be very clear, what we're talking about, as you rightly point out, we're not talking about NATO patrolling the skies over all of Ukraine. We're talking about NATO air forces or ground-based missile defenses taking out Russian missiles and Russian drones that are already in Ukrainian airspace, so not Russian airspace, Ukrainian airspace, and are threatening to cross into either Romania, Poland, Slovakia, or any of the countries on the border. Again, the legal case for that is crystal clear, and in defense terms, equally strong, because you don't want to wait until they stray over your territory. You may then have fewer options technically, from the technical standpoint, of shooting them down than you do if you try to shoot them down from a distance. Sometimes you need to try 2 or 3 times. Not every single interceptor that you fire, in case of ground-based missile defenses, not every single interceptor actually makes contact with the incoming missile or the incoming drone. So you may need to fire twice, thrice, possibly 4 times. And again, the closer the missile or drone is to your borders, the fewer shots literally you have at the target. So it makes sense to engage them over Ukraine. This is, it seems to be a limited, pretty clear-cut kind of operation. The fears of escalation in this case seem greatly overblown.
And we've had Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski advocating for this solution in response to the recommendations made by the Commission, the Helsinki Commission. He said that he was glad to see both Democrat and Republican lawmakers speaking with one voice. And we also have Romania, which has amended its legislation to make such actions possible. So perhaps we might be seeing a change in NATO's stance towards these drones and missiles. Now, moving on, do you think that Marco Rutte, who has often been referred to as the Trump whisperer, will actually have a lot of whispering to do within the next couple of months and beyond that?
Well, he continues in a great tradition of Trump whisperers. The previous Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, was somewhat of a magician when it came to charming Donald Trump. But of course, you can only get so far with personal charm. I mean, fundamentally, Donald Trump takes a dim view of alliances in general. It's not just the North Atlantic Alliance. He views alliances of all kinds as detrimental to U.S. security. That's a mindset that he appears to have brought from the business world. He is somewhat notorious for having sued, I think, every single, and if not every single, then at least most business partners he has ever been in business with. And he kind of takes that zero-sum approach to international relations as well. Which is
so if not alliances, then what? What would be his preferred approach?
Well, America going it alone and the rest of the world fending for itself. Essentially, that's kind of what the Make America Great Again means in a nutshell when you distill it. Now, this is a sentiment rather than a sort of a formulated plan. I suspect that Donald Trump himself at this point has no clue what precisely he will do with NATO or to NATO, were he to reassume the office of the president. The range of options ranges from withdrawing from NATO, quite unlikely, I think, because they will require the consent of a Senate, where he's not very likely to secure it. But he could simply condition U.S. assistance to a certain threshold in defense spending. He may simply say, I'm not going to come to your aid unless your country spends at least 2, 3, perhaps 4% of GDP on its defense, in which case Poland is in luck. The rest of us are out. Or he may simply make unpleasant noises about NATO in case of a win, but not much comes of it, which is kind of what happened in the last 4 years he was in power. So in terms of predictive capacity, his past statements on NATO carry little value. We simply don't know what he will do because he's famous for being inconsistent. But we do know, and we have strong reasons to fear for NATO, given then how hostile he is to the alliance and the idea of America actually aligning with anyone that in principle seems anathema to him.
Well, if Trump actually follows his business sense, why do you think he has such an enmity towards Ukraine? There are compelling arguments which say that this is an investment in security because you have a powerful ally and possibly also a NATO member in the future that serves as a bulwark. And even Ukraine, in the the Zelensky plan, the victory plan, they try to emphasize, if we win this war, we may actually take some of the burden off you with Ukrainian troops replacing some of the American troops on the eastern flank. Do you think this could actually serve as an appeal to this business sense that Trump reportedly treats as the primary motivation when it comes to politics?
So just to clarify, I said he brings a certain mindset from business, not that he lets his policy be dictated by business interests. And his mindset in business is that this is a kind of an enterprise where everybody's out for himself or herself. That's how he views international relations as well. I wouldn't overthink Donald Trump. I mean, the rational argument for closer U.S. engagement in Ukraine, the way you laid it out, is super strong. It's been made to him over and over and over, both in a previous term in power, when Ukraine was already under attack from Russia. It wasn't quite the full-scale invasion yet, but it was already at war, essentially, with Russia. Yet it didn't move him. What seems to move him on an emotional level is admiration for strong men, whether it's Xi Jinping in China, whether it's Kim Jong-un in North Korea, or Vladimir Putin in Moscow. He seems to fashion himself after them and have an unhealthy degree of admiration for the way they run their societies internally.
So beyond the business sense, there is also this sort of authoritarian streak that some people says he actually has. Well, we don't really know what's going to happen now. We're going to wait for the results of the election in the US. For the time being, Tomáš Valášek was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm Tomáš Valášek. Thank you for watching and please do stay with us.